Right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this NSA breakfast meeting. It's a slightly unusual feeling sitting here talking to people that one can't see, but I have it on good authority that there are quite a number of you out there, and I'm not just talking to myself. I suspect that very few of you will have eaten any sheep meat for breakfast, unless you've enjoyed a full Scottish, which might have included some haggis. I have the dubious honour of being your chairman for today's meeting. A rash choice in view of my poor grasp of technology, which seems to combine science and witchcraft and doesn't always do what is expected of it, even by those who understand the finer points. My name's Alistair Snedden. I'm from Bagshaw's Auctioneers and have been a livestock auctioneer in Derbyshire and surrounding counties for over 40 years and currently manage the market at Bakewell. I've had an involvement with NSA going back many years and have been chairman of the Central Region and still represent that area on the English Committee. At this point, I must mention our sponsors, Roy Thorne Solicitors, and thank them for their support of NSA. It is greatly appreciated. Today's topic is who will eat UK sheep meat in 2022, and I rather hope beyond, a review of work abroad to promote your product. I've long been concerned about the level of sheep meat consumption and trust that today's session will fill us with facts to replace some of my half-baked assumptions. Many of us thought that Brexit would result in a collapse in sheep prices, something which didn't happen. In fact, Brexit itself became obscured by the smokescreen of the pandemic. A year on, and prices are still good. Bakewell Market on Monday this week, hogs or old season lambs, as we're now taught to call them, sold to 327 pence a kilo, grossed up to £171 a head, with the SQQ average at 273 for a sample that included both lowland and hill breeds. At the older end of the age spectrum, cull ewes sold to £169 to average £110 a head. Most of us remember 2001 and 2007 when foot and mouth disrupted exports and the price dropped like a stone. It's good to know that great efforts are being made to ensure that UK sheep meat finds a market in Europe and beyond. Now, we have two speakers for you today. And the first one is Dr. Phil Hadley from Ahdb. Now, we're going to have two presentations and deal with questions at the end. So if you could put your questions in the Q&A box, Sean Riches at NSA is going to marshal them into appropriate piles, and we will deal with them all after we've heard from our two presenters. But to start with Dr. Phil Hadley, I've got the potted history here. He originally joined the organisation of Ahdb as it was in 2004 as Regional Development Manager for the Southwest region. He has an MSc in Meat Science from the University of Bristol and focused on the impact of dirty animals on meat hygiene. Thrilling topic. A PhD in animal production from the University of Nottingham and was made a Fellow of the Institute of Meat in 2017. His current role is International Market Development Director. He leads work seeking export access to global markets, linking with exporters, UK government departments and their overseas equivalents to deliver technical solutions and negotiate export approval. Following that access, Phil is also responsible for the vision and delivery of our international market development programs to support the growth of exports for our farmers, growers and processors to deliver stakeholder benefits. With the changes Brexit will inevitably bring, this is a key role for Ahdb. So our first speaker is Ahdb's export expert. I'll hand over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Alistair. Let me share my screen, fingers crossed, and you can see it. Just confirm. Right, can you are those slides visible then, Alistair?
They are for me.
Excellent. Okay, right. So thank you for that introduction. Let me see if I can move these on. Has that moved on?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a good introduction, Alistair. Thank you very much. My intention here in the next 10 or 15 minutes is really to outline the export activity for Ahdb. And Alistair succinctly put the impact of not having exports, reminding us of when we've been in disease situations. That kind of underlines why exports are important to underpin demand, and particularly when domestic demand wanes or we're restricted in our opportunities to sell our goods far and wide. So red meat, I'm going to talk about red meat more generally, and I am going to talk about pork and beef here as well to a little degree, but I'll explain why I'm going to do that as well as part of the presentation. So largest export sectors within the Ahdb sectors, and the value is approximately 1.4 billion per annum for beef, lamb and pork, and dairy exports are broadly similar across that whole range. So across the livestock sectors, there's an export value in excess of £3 billion sterling. So that is significant. It's critically important to balance the carcass, seasonal peaks of production, and creates competition in the domestic market, which underpins price. And our role really is to seek opportunities overseas and build on our reputation. UK has a good reputation for high quality products in international markets, and again, having a presence there and selling those high quality products really does reinforce that, and often our products in those overseas marketplaces are sold at a premium, which is a great news story for the sector as a whole. And then I've popped on the bottom there in red and just touch on the FTA negotiations and reciprocal agreements. So we're all aware, as government seeks trade overseas, then also our market will become more open and more liberal for imported products, and particularly from agriculture sector, that's something to be aware of. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. I'm going to leave that to David, who will follow after me. But suffice to say, we're extremely mindful of the impact that might have, both on our domestic market, but also competition in some of our key export markets overseas. So again, just to remind ourselves, why are we interested in exports? It adds value to the production in higher end markets, making sure we can sell every bit of the carcass to the market that is willing to pay the most for it, therefore underpin the livestock price, exploit our differences and build our reputation for quality. And I very much include genetics there. I'll come on to talk about the US market shortly, and the genetic opportunity that we have there. And of course, I understand that the next iteration of these webinars, you've got Rob Grinnell, my colleague from the UK Export Certification Partnership, so he'll go into that in much more detail. But when we think about exports of our sheep for the sector, we think about the livestock aspect as well as the meat aspects. Exports utilise oversupply and address peaks in seasonal production, and again, underpins the price, and carcass balance. So we don't eat whole carcasses across the piece generally. We're in the cheap meat side, we're more of a leg and loin market. We're certainly not high consumers of offal, so we're always looking for markets to help balance that carcass to ensure that we exploit every valuable piece of the commodity. And interesting enough, some products that we consider very low value or undesirable, and in some cases pet food or waste, are actually in other countries highly valued and command a premium product. So those are the diamonds that we're trying to find overseas. So what do we do as Ahdb? We do the technical market access work, import risk assessment questionnaires, etc., working in hand very closely with government, who is the central competent authority on market access agreements. But we work closely with industry and government to make sure that the agreements are achievable, realistic, the targets are identified, the opportunities are clear, etc., to make sure that we've got a good plan and a good strategy to find those markets, identify the challenges, support industry to address those challenges, and then agree the export health certificate. In the first instance, that's simply about gaining the access. Some of those access briefs take 3, 4, 5 years, so it's not a quick win situation. You have to have a long plan and a strategy to get into the market. So I'll come on to the US in a second. We've been working on the US market for 7 or 8 years to get to where we are today. But the market access is the start of the open of the market. And then, as Alistair said, then comes the trade development work. And we do a number of activities around there to support exporters. So outward missions to new and growing markets. An example is that in November, a small mission went out to the Middle East region to promote sheep meat exports to buyers, and hopefully I'll try and share a short video, and if I can't share the video, Sean will pop the links in the chat. I'd encourage you to look at that, because that highlights how we work with industry and government on overseas activity to promote products in the Middle East region, in this case, to encourage buyers and promote the quality of the product. We do trade shows such as Anuga and CL, but also in other countries where we've got a key growth goal, a growth target, and this provides a platform for exchange and raises the awareness of UK products. Unfortunately, because of COVID, a lot of those shows have been cancelled or postponed or rejigged in some way, and they've been digital of late. But we've also delivered some of those events where we have people in those particular countries, and I'll come on to that again in a second. We have a presence in the market, and you'd probably be surprised to see where we do have people or representatives in those growth markets. And we work very closely overseas with the local British embassies, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the Department for International Trade to grow opportunities in individual countries. And we also, with levy money, support the role of Agriculture Councillor based in the British Embassy in China, because China is a huge growth opportunities for all the protein sectors. And then finally, we have an office based in Brussels, which monitors EU policy and considers the impact that that might have on UK production. And again, where we are at the moment following EU exit, it's important that we're mindful of changes in the EU regulatory framework or etc., so that we're able to consider how we might adopt or address such challenges without market disruption. So the team, just to give you a view there, you can see we've got an office in Fontainebleau in just south of Paris, which Remy Fourier, who heads up that work there, is responsible for the activity across Europe, and we've got 6 agents in the key European markets. Then coming further afield, we have a representative in the Middle East region representing the growth opportunity there, particularly for sheep meat. We co-support the Ag Council in the British Embassy in Beijing, as I mentioned a moment ago, but we also have an agency and a permanent representative employed through the China-Britain Business Council, because of the opportunity and scale of growth there, to really ensure that we're able to understand Chinese requirements, understand the commercial drivers, to really exploit the growth potential in that marketplace. We have a representative in Japan. We gained access for beef and sheep meat in 2019 for Japan, and that's growing steadily, hampered somewhat by the inability to create those business relationships in person. But it is a market that will continue to develop for both the beef and the sheep sector, and we've had pork access for some time. And then switching to the other side of the world, we have a couple of representatives in the US marketplace, and the big red plus sign there identifies the fact that we're currently beginning work in Mexico, particularly on the pork side. But as I touched on earlier, we often break ground with genetics and pork into a market, and then begin the conversations about ruminants afterwards. So the pork sector is less challenging because it doesn't have the historic disease concerns that the beef and sheep sector does. So we gain access through pork and then move a conversation on for beef and sheep meat. And the same would be said across many of our markets. Pork starts the ball rolling, and then we move on to the ruminant material. So in terms of what's happened of late in the last couple of years, as I said, we've gained access for both beef and lamb for Japan. We've had pork for some time, longer than that. Taiwan pork access was granted, and we're currently now talking to the Taiwanese authorities about an inward audit visit for lamb approval. So that's important. We have approval for pork and beef in China, and again, the dialogue for lamb is now ongoing to try and seek lamb access. And you'll recognise that sheep meat sector or sheep meat demand in China has increased, and indeed the Australians and the New Zealanders have switched an awful lot of their exports to the Chinese marketplace, and it's now responsible for more than half of all New Zealand sheep meat exports. Gives you some idea of the potential for growth in China for sheep meat. US beef and lamb. In fact, the lamb's a very new story. So whilst we gained equivalence in 2019 alongside beef, we've been unable to export sheep meat to the US because they had a what's called the small ruminant rule in place, which didn't permit or excluded the export of both sheep meat and genetic material into the US from countries that had historic scrapie. We've worked hard in hand with government and the UK Export Certification Partnership to provide evidence and support discussions around the removal of that rule, which the American government agreed to do in December. And in fact, the rule was removed on the 3rd of January. So it wasn't a UK specific rule. It essentially took out exports of sheep meat from most of Europe. But it means now that market is open to us and we have equivalence. Doesn't mean to say commercial trade is currently in place, because we still need to finalise the export health certificate and get plants audit ready. But it is a very significant move forward for the ambitions of sheep meat sector in the US market. And it will open genetic opportunities as well. There is a demand for British genetics by US specialist breeders. So that is a really good move forward for us. And then just a few others to pick on there, a few pork, as I've said, and you'll understand the reasons why. But a number of these have just been on hold because the latter stages of these export health certificate agreements is the inward inspection visit, and clearly they haven't happened in COVID times. But we're currently talking through government to both Taiwan and Vietnam in terms of inward visits. We have a beef application in for South Korea, big market for imported beef, but will take some years to bring to bear. And then on the trade development, we've been using digital platforms for a while in international markets and have hosted a number of buyer and physical events where we have people in countries to keep the flag flying, to make sure that people know that we are still actively exporting and we have products and just to underpin our exports in the absence of international trade shows. Like all organisations, we've had to move to those digital platforms, and they serve a purpose, but there's nothing better than face-to-face interaction on the international market front. People buy things from people, and that relationship's important. So we're keen to get out there again, and in fact we have a number of activities planned for the last quarter of the financial year to the end of March, including Gulf Food in the Middle East region, which again, critical outlet for sheep meat products. And then we've built digital resources to promote the products widely in our key target markets. I'll just draw your attention again to the links there. So the first one, the We Care, really is a video that we use on international platforms. If we get a chance at the end, we can perhaps play it, which promotes the high quality Britishness of our products. And I'd encourage you to look at that link afterwards if we don't get to it today. And then the other video is the recent one of the activity in the Middle East region in partnership with the British Embassy, specifically promoting lamb to the region, and over an event at the embassy in Dubai where over 170 food service buyers in the region were present and met with UK exporters and enjoyed the quality of British lamb, and some commercial transactions has taken place as a result of that recent exercise. So some pictures there. The ones on the left actually show you shots from that event that I've just mentioned, British Lamb networking reception. And then over on the right, an event held in China just a few days ago for 35 food influencers in the Chinese marketplace, more specifically targeted towards pork. But again, it does give us the opportunity to highlight beef and lamb products. And then the two images to the bottom right of your screen, a webinar very similar to this one for 80 red meat buyers in the Japanese marketplace. So they sat in a room in Japan and we did exactly what I'm doing now. We gave presentations about the quality and safety and reputation and integrity of the products to those buyers. And then they were able to go to the room on your right and have a video call with the sellers of our products. So it was a session that included all the reputation building thing, and then enabled them to talk directly to sellers of the product. So that's what we've been doing in the absence of being able to physically meet someone. A team of us were up in the middle of the night to accommodate the time difference in Japan, including a representative for the FSA, to really push the food safety aspects, because it's pretty critical in the Japanese market. They're very sensitive to food safety. And the trade show piece that we do, these are images from events pre-COVID and the pandemic, and you'll see we've very much used the Union Jack imagery and the Food is Great branding to promote the product. And you can see the lamb images within that. And then this is a nougat which took place in Germany in October. You can see a different event. It did go ahead. It was very successful from our perspective. Less people, but those that went had to go through many hoops to get there, and as a result of that, they were all serious buyers. So a very successful event, but one of the biggest in-person events we've done in these troubled times. But we're looking forward to resuming that activity, hopefully in the coming future, as things improve. We also do a significant work looking at market insight, so understanding the market, understanding the purchase drivers, and understanding where the growth is enables us to make sure that we target our efforts and resources in the right places. So there's some examples of the consumer insight work we do. We also do look at trade data and compare what our competitors are doing in those marketplaces to help us underpin the thought process and the delivery of the work overseas. And then we also have done recently some consumer work looking at the reputation and how these overseas consumers consider British products. And you can see there that I touched on right at the beginning, British food is considered to be a premium product by lots of parts of the world, and particularly those markets that we're currently focused on, which include the Asian markets and the Americas. So there's a good warmth there. Less so in the European markets. Of course, EU exit has not necessarily improved our reputation with our EU neighbours, but our exports to the EU remain a principal outlet for our products. So it's our nearest market, it's our highest value market. The product is well established. Yes, it's got more difficult, but there's still a significant trade to be done in Europe. So we continue to work hard through Remy and the representatives across the key European markets to ensure that we remain present and relevant to our EU buyers. So just coming on to my final slide now, looking forward, exports continue to remain a critical part of what we do at Ahdb, both the market access work, where we are uniquely placed to be able to be that bridge between government and industry with all the international support and intelligence that we're able to bring to bear, highlighted by the successes we've had in the last few years to grow our reach. We're developing the approach to include new support in the newly granted markets to make sure we can exploit those key opportunities. In these new markets, you need to understand the culture, the way they do business, speak the language, etc. And that's why it's key to have representatives in those countries and try and do it from a distance. This increases our ability to deliver on the ground for those types of activities. And UK government are also strengthening their overseas presence and reach for UK food exports. So again, that's to be applauded as we look to export more products and more businesses taking part in the export front. And we're improving our consumer insight work to make sure what we're doing is relevant to those markets. So we now invest money to understand what the key purchase drivers are. So in Asia, for example, it would be food safety and less on welfare. But in Western US, for example, you dial up the welfare attributes of UK products. So getting the messaging right for the market is important. It isn't simply one size fits all. EU core remains core, and we'll continue to work in the EU to drive those opportunities while trying to develop the third country markets. And then you'll be aware that we're currently seeking people to register to take part in in a vote in the spring on our AHDB activities, and within that will include some broad bucket activities such as domestic promotion and international promotion. So we're seeking views on what stakeholders want from AHDB as an organisation, but of course, from my perspective, from the export front, and in terms of how stakeholders want us to take that forward and how they value that work. And I think David's going to talk a little bit more now about the voting process. So with that, the strapline AHDB is a critical enabler for farming success, but importantly defined by farmers. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen, Alistair, and I will hand back to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Phil, for that comprehensive view of what's being done on sheep farmers' behalf in the wider world. It's clearly extremely complex and requires an understanding over and above those of us who sit at home as armchair pundits and don't know the finer points of these things. Now, without further ado, I'm going to push on to our second speaker, and I would ask you to questions for anybody, as it were, to be put in the Q&A box. I know there are some there already. The wonders of technology are informing me about that, but I'm going to introduce to you now David Swales. David Swales is the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board's Head of Strategic Insight. His role covers a diversity of areas from agriculture and trade policy analysis to retail and consumer insight and the evaluation of AHDB programs and services. David has authored a number of AHDB Horizon reports on issues relating to Brexit. He has provided evidence on this topic to parliamentary select committees, ministers, civil servants, and levy payers. A geographer by training, David specialised in agricultural geography and rural change. Strikes me as a modern day Nostradamus who's going to provide us with a view of the sheep industry yet to come. Over to you, sir.
Fabulous. Thank you for that billing, Alistair. I will do my best to live up to that. But yeah, I think I'll try to share my screen before we go too much further. So please shout if you can't see anything. But yeah, what I wanted to do today really is we thought it would sort of complement what Phil's already spoke about, just to give you guys a bit of a flavour of some of the work we do around AHDB when it comes to analysing data and evidence and understanding the opportunities. So I work within the market intelligence function at AHDB, and there's a team of us who do quite a bit of analysis work around trade and around consumer insights, really to understand what some of those key opportunities and threats are from trade going forward. And we obviously work very closely with Phil. So some of the sort of priority markets which Phil has identified have been very much identified based on really strong evidence around where some of the key opportunities are for UK lamb going forward. So yeah, today I've got about 10 minutes to talk. So I was literally just going to try to give you a flavour of some of the work, hopefully explain to you where you can access some of this information. So John, we certainly supply a lot of it to Phil and to our exporters, but most of the information we produce is freely available on our website as well. And if you're so inclined, you can come and have a look at it, or indeed give myself a call or drop me an email if you're interested in finding out a bit more. So just to start then, in terms of some of the work we are doing within the team, we publish an awful lot of information on an ongoing basis. So our core work is all about understanding trends, looking at all of the data, and trying to understand what's going on and what it means for our levy payers. So, some of our key outputs are shown on this slide. So, we produce a number of quite big glossy Horizon reports each year, and those are really in-depth pieces of analysis where we try to look at all of the detail and crunch all of the numbers to understand what the sort of threats and opportunities for the sector are. But we also produce more regular outputs, things like e-newsletters and articles and blogs and website pages. So there's a load of information which you can access And perhaps two of the key things I've highlighted at the bottom there. So if you don't already sign up to Beef and Sheep Weekly or our Horizon newsletter, please do visit our website, and there's a keeping in touch section where you can sign up to receive regular updates from us in those areas. So, John, we are using your levy to conduct this analysis, and yeah, you're more than welcome to subscribe to those newsletters and hopefully get a more regular feel of the work we're doing on your behalf. I wanted to highlight a few bits of data and information from a recent report we've produced in opportunities for the sheep sector. So round about last Easter time, we published a Horizon report, which was focused entirely on sheep meat. The reason we did that is because I think everyone had sort of sighed collectively a big sigh of relief following the sort of successful conclusion of the Brexit EU trade talks. So we knew we had a trade deal with the EU. We knew we'd probably avoided a lot of the worst downside risks which we were looking at around Brexit. And market prices were really buoyant, and they have obviously remained quite buoyant since. But we thought there was a number of key sort of challenges and issues which still remained, and key opportunities for the sector which could be capitalised on. So we tried to pull that together into this report, which you can get to on our website. By way of context, I think a really important context for this webinar is that in the long term, at least, our domestic market for sheep has been in decline. So this graph looks at a number of commodity products and shows average consumption per person. So this doesn't take into account the fact we've had population growth over this period, but on a per person basis, you can see since, if we go all the way back to the 1980s, there has been a pretty continuous decline in most of these commodities, but certainly sheep has led the way. And we talk a lot about why that is in the report, but certainly price is a factor. I mean, the relatively higher price of sheep meat is a factor for consumers. We've seen over this period a rise of dish-based cuisine, which maybe lamb, and certainly the lamb roast hasn't played so well in, and a whole range of other factors. So, I think export markets probably show a bit of a different picture, which I'll look at in a moment. But I think this trend probably means that export markets are getting increasingly important. We do, a lot of analysis work around what consumers are doing and what buttons we need to press to understand how to sell more lamb. So we know, this is a very broad trend, but we know lamb really over indexes for some groups like older consumers and also Muslim consumers, who are really key to underpin our domestic market. And yeah, there's a lot of information in this within the report. One of the questions posed in the webinar is, where is UK sheep meat eaten around the world? And what's going to happen going forward? So I thought I'd try to address some of those. This graph shows the top 10 markets for UK exports of sheep meat in 2020. And you can see here, France is by far the biggest market. If we were to sum up France with all those other EU markets, which Phil spoke about, we would get to about 85% of our total exports. So the EU market is absolutely central and key to our export activities. And in recent years, our volume of exports has increased. We're around about 90,000 tonnes of sheep meat exports going, with that EU market being really key. But what we've seen since Brexit, as Phil alluded to earlier, is we've seen a whole host of new sort of rules and regulations and custom checks come in, which have obviously made the news in recent months and years. And that's made the job of our exporters that much more tricky when it comes to exporting to the EU. There's been a lot more trade friction within the trade sphere, and that's made those exports a bit more expensive than they once were. So that 85% is actually a decline. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is the volume of sheep meat going to the EU slightly coming down, and the volume going to some of these other markets increasing. But yeah, in total, there's 56 markets, which I think just shows, I mean, what a good job Phil and his team are doing in getting us market access to this whole range of markets, which probably diversifies our risk when it comes to trade. And I mean, this is interesting. This is data from HMRC, who monitor the imports and exports of product coming into the country. I was absolutely astounded to see number 10 on this list for UK sheep meat exports is New Zealand. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Maybe Phil has a view, but certainly according to HMRC, at least, New Zealand is one of these export markets, and we are sending a volume of sheep meat to New Zealand. So that must be a really good sign. But yeah, I think going forward, there are a whole host of opportunities out there. And whilst my graph for opportunities in the UK or consumption in the UK shows this gradual decline, the picture globally is very different. And that's something we explored a lot within the report. So data from the FAO shows that consumption of sheep meat is growing globally by around about 2% a year, and we expect that growth to continue over the next 10 years. Now, what this graph does is, I think, gives you a nice comparison between those sort of developed markets like Europe and the EU and the UK, with more developing regions of the world, and hopefully it demonstrates that the vast bulk of that growth which is going to happen comes within these developing markets. So Phil Jobbin had his map of the world, and a lot of those activities we were doing, and offices and people we have around the world at Ahdb are based in the Middle East, and they're based over in the Asia Pacific region as well. And that's partly because of this evidence. So we know that there's going to be a huge explosion of middle-class consumers in these developing markets. That's because there's a combination of rapid population growth and rapid economic growth, and people are getting wealthier. And when people sort of come into that middle-class consumer bracket, they're earning, I mean, by Western standards, a relatively modest amount of money, but around about $10 to $100 a day. They start to get more disposable income, and they spend more money on dairy and meat products, and that creates a fantastic opportunity for us. So, I mean, some of these markets, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, have hugely growing consumption, and their domestic production systems can't keep up with the demand. So we've analysed that in a lot of detail, and we can identify that actually some of these markets represent really good opportunities if we can get the right market access, and hopefully we can get preferential trade deals as well to support that trade. But yeah, as well as looking at opportunities, it's also important to consider some of the threats which trade deals bring. And we do a lot of work analysing trade deals and their potential impact. So, John, we started to do some of this work with Brexit, where we did some modelling and some work to understand what different types of Brexit would mean for the sector. But we've continued that on because I'm sure, as you're aware, the UK government is now seeking to strike trade deals with countries around the world. So this map shows where we do have existing trade deals in place in dark green, and in light green, some of those markets where we are seeking to put trade deals in place, or the deal's been agreed but not yet ratified and in operation. So we know there's a number of countries out there which the UK government is focusing on, and the sort of initial three which we're focusing on at Ahdb are the US, Australia, and New Zealand. And we've already published reports on Australia and the US. and we're about to now start to do some work on New Zealand. I thought I'd just touch on some of the Australian work just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing there. But I think this is a really key area of work for Ahdb, because when we were within the European Union, the European Commission used to do lots of modelling analysis and trade impact assessment work on our behalf. And that information would be used by the politicians, and they would get a lot of evidence around what the impact of these trade deals is for the agricultural sector. Now, our concern is, since we've left the EU, a lot of that work, John, we don't benefit from the EU work anymore. It doesn't cover the UK, and there's a bit of a gaping hole. So DEFRA do some impact assessment work, but they don't publish any of it or share it more widely. So we think this is a really important gap which Ahdb are filling, to provide the evidence base both to yourself as levy payers, but also to the politicians and the people making the decisions, so they can understand what the impact of some of these deals are. So in terms of Australia, John, I've only got a short amount of time, but just to give you a flavour of some of the work there, we obviously know that Australia is a really big producer of sheep meat. It's a much bigger producer than us, producing over 700,000 tonnes a year, and it is very export focused. So they are a global player when it comes to exports. I think they're the biggest exporter in the world when it comes to sheep meat. So and their cost of production are obviously lower than ours. So, John, on the surface, there's a lot to be concerned about with a trade deal with Australia in terms of what it might mean for the UK sector. We try to look at that in a lot of detail and dig into the information, and hopefully some of this probably reassures you a little bit in terms of what the impact might be. When we looked at Australia's exports of sheep meat, John, you can see here on the graph, their key market is China, which has grown massively in recent years. But you can see there they supply to a whole host of markets, and these are a mix of different markets. Some of them are really high value. So, John, the United States market, relatively lower volume than China, but the green bar there shows the average price is well over £6,000 a tonne. So they have access to a whole host of markets, and a lot of those markets are actually higher value than our UK import price for sheep meat, which is shown as the dotted line there. So the fact Australia already is exporting to lots of markets, and lots of those markets are very high value, means they're unlikely to divert huge volumes of product from where they're currently sending them to us. And in the case of China, you can see the volume's large, but the value of that export is relatively low, and that's because they're exporting particular cuts and offals which would be of little value in the UK. They won't be of high demand by our consumers. So hopefully that provides some reassurance. And what we were able to do with this work is also do a bit of a quantitative impact assessment using an economic model. And that showed that, I mean, if all things remain equal, the trade deal would probably lead to an increase in imports from Australia of around about 10,000 tonnes of sheep meat. Now, there's a lot of caveats and risks associated with that number, but I mean, at a headline level, it does represent quite a big increase in our current imports from Australia. But when you put it into context to our total sheep meat imports, it's a relatively small number. And we also found some of that number would be offset by changes in our exports to the EU and other partners as well. So I've galloped through there and gave you a really headline overview, but there's lots of analysis work going on at Ahdb. So please do visit our website or sign up for updates. In terms of some things which you'll be seeing in the next few months, we're publishing an agri-market outlook at the back end of January. We're looking at the sustainable farming incentive and what that might mean for levy payers in March. And as I alluded to, the New Zealand trade deal is the next one we want to assess and analyse, and we're aiming to publish some work on that in April. So yeah, lots of work going on. Hopefully that's of interest to you. As Phil mentioned, we've got a big exercise going on at the minute called Shape the Future, which you may have heard of. if you do visit our website, you will notice this very prominently, and there's a big button in the middle of the screen asking you to register to vote. So could I please encourage you to do that? So this exercise is all about getting your feedback on where we should be spending your levy money. So Joanne, if what we've said today is valuable to you and you want us to do more export work, please do register to vote. And when the vote goes on in the spring, let us know what you think about that work which we do on your behalf. And that was all I was going to cover. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, David. That's an awful lot to take in. I don't even think those with a photographic memory will be able to hold the statistics indefinitely. We now move on to the question and answer part of the session. I'm hoping that that Sean is there with the questions and has marshalled them accordingly.
Yes, thanks very much, Alistair. I've got the questions here. A number of questions both in the chat within and in the Q&A, and I'll try and group them together as well as I can. The very first question, which Phil has already indicated he'd like to answer live, notwithstanding the forthcoming challenge on the legal basis of the decision to discontinue quality standard mark for export, the loss of QSM will lead to the loss of differentiation at retail for British English lamb. The QSM benefits from great support, translations in European languages, declination in British English, and 15 years of investment. What are the plans? The EU is more than 90% of lamb exports. Please note that we have lost market presence and share with Brexit with branded products. So Phil, you indicate you'd like to answer that one live.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, so as you know, JP, we're in separate exchanges on this, but for the broader audience, the quality standard mark, which is a mark that we launched some years ago, going back to the early 2000s, we've looked at that and reviewed it and concluded that we're going to withdraw the quality standard mark because of a number of factors, including the ongoing cost of the audit responsibility. As an organisation, stakeholders have pushed us to evolve, and in doing that, we've looked at a number of the activities that we're doing and concluded with the board and processors and representatives that are using quality standard mark that it's time to evolve that process. So we'll move away from the quality standard mark, and we're currently looking at other opportunities to brand product or to have promotional toolkits for exporters to use as they wish on the market specific to their customer base. You'll recognise that in the slides, in the slideshow, we include a lot of Union Jack imagery on the trade stands, but we do have some limitations about how we can use that on packed products. And we're currently in a process of considering what comes next, effectively. And it isn't just the European market, of course, we're talking about a much broader picture here, and in terms of underpinning the reputation of British products overseas. So it remains a work in progress in terms of what that will look like going forward.
Great, thanks very much, Phil. Another question then, also from JP Garnier, for David. I must commend lots of excellent work by market intelligence on the domestic market. However, I am concerned that very good lamb consumer research, such as in France and the Dutch study, before Christmas is not used, and large surveys, low quality generic surveys are commissioned. For instance, the 6-country study reveals that 16% of Europeans buy regularly British lamb is not correct. We could not supply. This includes the figure of 12% from Scandinavia, where British lamb is not sold. Similarly, saying that 37% of European would spend more, but it is not realistic. To conclude that Europeans are interested in animal welfare and the environment and origin in France is not terribly interesting. So the question is, when will Ahdb use its own research on lamb at country level?
Yeah, thank you, JP. So JP touches on a few interesting points there. It's certainly true to say we spend quite a bit of money at Ahdb looking at retail and consumer trends, understanding consumers' attitudes and perceptions, and how that sort of feeds through in terms of their purchase behaviour. So, in terms of domestic market, I think that's probably it's obviously our biggest market for sheep meat, and we spend probably a lot more there understanding consumers' behaviour than we do internationally. So that's certainly fair to say. What we've done in recent years is start to ramp up that international work. So on Phil's slides, he highlighted a few reports which we published, which you can get to on our website, where we've kind of looked at individual markets around the world and what's happening in terms of consumers there. Now, I mean, JP touched on a few things, like a lot of the work we do internationally is attitude based. So it's surveying consumers and asking their views. And what we will sometimes see is a disconnect between what consumers say and what they say is important. Yes, buying British is important to me. Actually, when they get into the shop, their behavior doesn't always follow through. But yeah, John, I mean, there's a place for that evidence, is what I would say, John, provided it's put into the right context and it's used at a sort of quantitative level to kind of set the level, set a certain level of information. But we wouldn't rely on that alone. So, John, I mean, just to reassure JP, what we would always do is drill into the individual markets and look at sort of on the ground data and evidence. And we've done some of that in those reports. So we don't rely on that attitudinal data on its own, because as JP has highlighted, sometimes consumers say one thing or think one thing when they're doing a survey, and actually when they're in store they behave slightly differently.
Thank you, David. As expected, there's quite a number of questions here on New Zealand and on the US, so I'll try and bring them into one group. So the first one here is from Richard Oglesby. Read an article that said we will be importing 35,000 tons of sheep meat from New Zealand in the first 5 years of the new trade deal. How much is imported from New Zealand at the moment? And is that one for you, David, I expect, is it?
Yeah, Phil might want to chip in as well. So yeah, basically, New Zealand is our biggest import supply. I'm rapidly trying to find this in my report because it will be in there. But yeah, basically, the reason New Zealand is so key for us in terms of sheep meat imports is we've got this TRQ in place, which has been in place a long time, which basically allowed trade with the EU, including the UK, on a tariff-free basis. So that TRQ was set up, I think, for about 120,000 tonnes of sheep meat a year into the EU. And as a result of Brexit, we basically took around about half of that TRQ, and the EU took the other half. So I can clarify the exact figure in a little bit, but New Zealand already has tariff-free access for around about 60,000 tonnes of sheep meat. And in the last 4 or 5 years, they've always been below that level. So, I could look up the exact number, but it's certainly way below that tariff-free threshold. And it's been declining in recent years, partly because, like Australia, New Zealand have got market access to a range of countries around the world, including China, and they have seen massive growth in demand in the Chinese market, which means there's basically more profitable places for them to send some of their cuts than to the UK at the minute. Is there anything you want to chip in, Phil?
Well, I mean, I agree, David. As they focused on other markets, the European market and the UK market has become less. I won't say it's not important to them, because it clearly is, but they've sent less product here. But I think the watchword there is we need to be mindful that if there's disruption in that Chinese marketplace, and it is a market that is somewhat volatile, that it might see product shifted back to EU and the UK. So yes, they've undersupplied arguably for a period, and there's no evidence that that will change unless something quite dramatic happens in other markets.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay. There's a couple of questions here on the US. How much lamb do you expect the US market to take per year in tonnage from this year?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. We don't really think about it on a yearly basis. We think about it in a 5-year horizon type basis, really. And the reason is that the first year, or indeed the first couple of years, is not really reflective of the opportunity, because in the first year plants have to understand the standards and gear up and become approved and audited, and then start commercial trade, and then trade grows reputationally over time. So it doesn't, it goes in a steady state before it increases. We've estimated a 5-year value of approximately 37 million sterling. So most of the estimates are done on that 5-year horizon. So I think suffice to say that in the first year or two, and I don't really expect us to be sending product until the second half of 2022, because there's still an audit process to go through, it will be very modest indeed, but the growth potential will be there. And it will also require the processing sector to grasp that nettle, to try and seek those commercial relationships to drive that trade.
Can I chip in on that as well?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. So, in terms of the data, the US, I don't think is ever going to be a huge market in volume terms for us. So in total, they only export around about 60,000 tons. And obviously Australia and New Zealand are their main suppliers at the minute. So I don't think it's ever going to be a massive volume market for us, which is what the sort of question asked about. But the key sort of characteristic of the US market, which makes it so valuable for us, is that it's such a high value market. So if you look at their import prices for lamb, it's around about $9 a kilo. And that compares to our average export price of about $6 a kilo. Now, that's partly because we're comparing apples with pears, and we're exporting slightly different things than they're importing, but they certainly have a huge demand for really high value cuts. So within this mix, which Phil's trying to develop in terms of access to different parts of the world, I think they could play a really key role for as a potential market for probably a relatively low volume, but a relatively high value mix of cuts.
Thanks, David. So you kind of answered the question from Frank Langrish there as well about how will it be significant in terms of the market. Jan Ledoux has added one here, and in looking to open up the US market to UK lamb, what spec will be aimed at, given the appetite for Australian products seems to be for large carcasses? So perhaps want to expand a little bit more on that, David.
So is that for the US market?
For the US market, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's a challenge. Certainly at the minute, our main export market is the EU, as we've seen. And in terms of product, it does tend to be whole or half carcasses. Now, that isn't what the market is in the US. So, there's a challenge there for our industry in that what we probably need to happen, and this will be challenging in the current environment, is we need more of that sort of butchery and processing domestically to turn that into those specific cuts and packaged appropriately for the US market. Now, John, we've obviously heard a lot in recent months about the challenges the processing sector has with labour availability and COVID and all those issues. So, I don't think I'm saying that will be an easy challenge to overcome, but certainly that's where that demand is. And as Phil said, this isn't a market which is suddenly going to spring open in the next few weeks. We've got a bit of time to work on this, but there's really clear evidence there for the processors that actually there's some value market there, and indeed there's opportunities within the EU and elsewhere if we could break the carcass down a bit more than we currently do to target like particular cuts at specific markets. That would have a higher return than sending a whole carcass to one market as we do at present.
Phil, was there anything further you would like to add on that point?
I mean, we've got a different product to the Australian outlet for sure. We're more akin to the New Zealand product. And if you look at US import data, the Australians have got 75% of that market, and the New Zealanders pretty much the bulk of what's left. So, you've got the seasonal variation between us and the Kiwis. I think what I'm encouraged by is the fact that leading up to the announcement of the change in the legal rule, which opens the door for us, is the processing sector have been very interested and excited about the opportunity to explore that US market as an additional outlet. So that's good. And I think making those commercial connections, sending the sample products. I think, as you know, the product is fantastic and will speak for itself and can certainly compete on quality. So then we'll find you know, a path through for that trade to start to grow commercially over the coming months.
And a follow on from that, which is equally representative of other areas, is there a large potential ethnic market in the US?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I dropped a response to Frank in the questions. Yes, there is, and it's growing. The data on that market is a bit sketchy in places, but we having looked at that, we understand there is that opportunity there, and indeed a number of the processors that are interested process a halal compliant products. So we already have the experience and the credibility of providing such a product to a global market, but in this case in the US ethnic markets. Not only is the Muslim consumer, of course, there's also a strong Hispanic population, which is a sheep meat consuming population. Americans more generally are low level sheep meat consumers, so that's where the growth potential possibly lies.
Okay, right, thanks very much. So just going down through, so from Ian Duncan, in developing new markets, how do you square the difficulty of having product available to meet new demand in a supply chain almost broken by labour difficulties through COVID and Brexit? David, would you like to take that one first?
Yeah, so I guess I alluded to that earlier, because we're obviously facing quite significant challenges at the moment, and I think the work Phil's doing to open us up with different markets is I think partly about managing sort of risk. So as well as exposing us to opportunities, it means we're less reliant on individual markets than maybe we were in the past, and we can be a little bit of fleet of foot. If there is a problem in a particular market, there are others we can supply to. But yeah, I think the supply chain challenges are an issue. I think it's our role to explore what the opportunities and explain what the evidence shows. And certainly, the data is very clear. There's a growing global market. There's different requirements in some of these different markets we've identified, and some of that will involve more butchery and preparing products, which will present a supply chain challenge. So, I think I would put that challenge over to the processors to think about, do the costs and benefits work out for them to explore those opportunities, and hopefully that's something Ahdb can help them with. But yeah, we're certainly facing difficulties at the moment, but this is a long-term gain we're looking at here. We're looking sort of, in some cases, some of the data and the forecasts are looking 10 years hence, and I'm sure they show trends which will continue even beyond that. So, this isn't something we're expecting to happen overnight in all cases.
Phil, anything further to add?
Well, again, David's covered that well. It is a challenge for sure. Hopefully, it's been a unique set of circumstances in the last couple of years. Hopefully that will change. Some of those markets require a very high specification in terms of cuts. So US French trim racks, for example, require an amount of labour, which the industry will have to get its head around to be able to deliver that, should they wish to explore that opportunity and make that a commercial business. Other aspects require, whole carcass trade requires limited labour. So it's about having the mix that suits a business, or gearing up and investing accordingly, notwithstanding the fact, there are mechanisation options available, and they're not always compatible with UK production systems, etc., etc. But processors to have that broader range of opportunities have to invest in either the staff resources or the processing capability if they want to play in those markets.
Okay, thanks. I think that's gone through most of the questions I've seen here, and answered most of them. I know you've answered some of them actually live. The couple of questions that I have here, you mentioned markets abroad, and there's work obviously being done by the UK government at the moment for access to CPTPP and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Would you like to expand a little bit more about the actual work that you're supporting for those opportunities? Perhaps Phil, you could start.
Yeah, so we work closely with UK government overseas. As I said, we co-fund the Ag Council in China. There's also a similar role in the Middle East region, which again, I can't express enough the opportunity for the Middle East region for our sheep meat exports. The UK government has a plan to install a number of these posts in some key growth markets. They might not be instantly, as David mentions, instantly obvious, but have the longest growth potential over a number of years. And it's about developing the capability in country to grow those relationships to move forward our access or our commercial trade growth. So, there's an ambition from UK government to grow the team resources to further exploit those opportunities. So we'll be working closely on that in our key target markets. So it's an ambitious plan. Details are not fully available at the moment, but you may have seen pre-Christmas the announcement that they're looking to install a number of ag and food counsellors across those key markets. So we welcome that because it will make a difference to the exports of the products.
David, anything to add on the opportunities perhaps that both those markets or both those conglomerations of countries offer?
Well, certainly, up to now, the trade deals which have been prioritised, Australia, the US and New Zealand tend to be quite big global exporters. So, they tend to have more threat associated than with opportunity, perhaps with the exception of the US, where there are some opportunities for sheep meat, as we've discussed. But certainly CPPT probably is the reason why we're targeting these deals initially in the first place, because the government strategy, I think, is to get those agreements in place, which will make signing up to this sort of Pacific region trade deal much easier. And that certainly has a lot of opportunity associated with it for the red meat sector and for sheep specifically. So, a lot of the countries in that deal are in that Asia Pacific region, which I highlighted as a really big growing region for consumption. So, certainly the opportunities for the sheep sector and for agriculture more generally will potentially grow if we can get in with that trade deal. It may be the case the government's approach is maybe providing us with a bit of pain in the short term, but maybe if we look sort of 5-10 years hence, maybe there's some really good opportunities heading our way if we can get from A to B.
Okay, thanks. A last question from me before I come back to Alistair. Given what's happened over the last couple of years in consumer demand and actually consumer access to a bit more direct sheep meal sales here in the UK, has that led to any real changes? Are you seeing any real changes in carcass balance opportunities domestically and therefore in international markets? And start with you, Phil, on that one.
I think, it's probably one for our market intelligence colleague, Steve Evans, if you wanted to consider having a focus on domestic trends for sheep meat consumption. I'm sure he'd be able to give you an insightful presentation. Clearly, purchasing habits have changed over the last couple of years, and food service has been stopped in the main, and is just returning. We know sheep meat does, or lamb in particular, does well in food service settings. So it has been a challenge. I think consumers switch back pretty quickly when we return to normal service. What we're hoping to do with things like the Eat Balance promotional campaign, which features beef, lamb and pork in various guises, that you may have seen on the TV and in social media just now, is about making sure that people appreciate the product, recognize its quality and its significant, and continue to eat lamb in the way that they've been doing over the last 12 or 18 months. So but it is a challenge against declining consumption and so on. So I think there's another webinar just like this that will look at domestic consumption patterns, and would probably answer those questions more fully than we're able to now.
David?
Yeah, Phil's doing a good job of pitching us to come back again, isn't it? Or pitching colleagues to come back. But yeah, certainly to set the scene, that long-term decline I painted probably actually in the last couple of years has been reversed a little bit. So COVID, bizarrely, has benefited, I think, domestic lamb consumption, and it's for the reason Phil alluded to. We've seen a massive disruption in the channels where people are buying. Do you know what I mean? So supermarkets have done ever so well over the last couple of years because of the food service sector suffering. But what we've noticed from the data, and Steve is far more expert than I in this, but what we've noticed is the food service market has a lot of different components to it, and one aspect which has performed really well and it's performing better than it's ever performed is the sort of takeaway and delivery market. So like the Deliveroos and the traditional takeaways, that market has actually boomed in the last couple of years, and that's a market where sheep meat performs really well. So when we talk to the media about this, we talk about lamb curries and kebabs doing really well in COVID, and they get really excited by that. But there's an element of truth in that when you look at the data. So actually, the last couple of years, we've actually seen domestic demand do really well, which is probably partly an explanation for why prices have been so buoyant. I think our concern looking forward is as things hopefully return to normal. We know there's a lot of inflation in the system at the minute. Consumers' belts are likely to have to tighten given energy bills and all these other factors. So our concern is, I mean, sheep meat is a relatively expensive product. I mean, there's probably some risks over the next year or so that maybe the buoyant market we've seen domestically over the last couple of years, there's probably some risks about whether that will continue.
Great. Okay, thank you. I have got one last question here from Dave Tucker. What role could the government play in ensuring fairness in the supply chain in order for processors to have confidence to invest? Phil, would you like to take that one to start with?
Sorry, Sean, can you just repeat that again?
Yeah, what role could the government play in ensuring fairness in the supply chain in order for processors to have confidence to invest?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I can give you much insight in that, really. I mean, there's been much conversation about intervention in markets and market price transparency, and particularly in the US right now, that's a big debate about power in the supply chain. I'm not sure I can add much to that other than probably down to lobbying bodies like yourself to try and get government to up the dialogue within that to try and ensure fairness across the piece.
David?
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but we certainly know that margins are very tight in the processing sector, and they've got a whole host of challenges at the moment. So it's I think a difficult space to be in, and it's probably something which does merit some input, I think, from government and from others to try to get to some solutions.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, just to mention to everybody, we've put in the chat those links that Phil mentioned earlier for you to have a look at later. So I'll now hand back to our chair, Alistair, to wrap up.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, for dealing with the questions so masterfully. That I've always been taught that once you delegate tasks to people who can do it better than yourself, and you've definitely filled the bill as far as that was concerned. We've had a wealth of information thrown at us. All the questions that I'd got in my own mind have been answered, I think, on one or other of the previous ones, and I'm concerned about the price that we're seeing at the moment for lamb, and I'm sure that the farmers who are listening today or hoping to look at the session at a later time will want to know your opinions of how long the current price can be sustained. We know that export is obviously important to propping up that current price, and we've mentioned previously how vulnerable we are in this country if our domestic trade diminishes and we become even more reliant on exports. Have you got a quick comment on that for both speakers just before we call it a day.
On domestic decline, Alistair, and export.
Yes, the fact
yeah.
that if we become more and more reliant on export, what happens if we are we going to end up with a situation where nobody can afford it here and it all goes to distant corners of the globe? I mean, that's sort of a slightly facetious extrapolation of the facts, but I'm just putting it there for a suggestion.
I mean, exports underpin price because it gives further outlets, and I think you look around the world that countries export products that's surplus or they can extract a higher value from. So if you look at it in its most basic form, we don't necessarily sell carcasses, we sell bits of carcasses, and therefore the real art is placing that bit of the carcass in the market that will pay you the highest value at any one point in time. We're fortunate, unlike some other exporting countries, that we do have a strong domestic market and a lot of our product is eaten at home. So I think we can take great solace in that while seeking further opportunities overseas to maximize the value of each and every animal. But of course, when we do consumer surveys, one of the limitations on lamb consumption is price. So we need to be mindful that it doesn't simply become a high days and holidays type product. And maybe that's through innovation and other products. David touched on kebabs there and so on. They tend to be more multiple ingredients, but keep consumers eating lamb, albeit at a price point. But clearly, our objective and everybody on this webinar's objective is to maximize the value of every animal. And that's what exports offers alongside that strong domestic market. It's a sum of the parts. It isn't one or the other, in my view. David?
Yeah, no, I would agree, Phil. I mean, when we talk to consumers about lamb, there's a lot of positives there. So lamb is seen as a special product. It's seen as tasty. It's seen as something that they would like to have as a treat. So, I mean, I don't think it's likely that we'll see loads of consumers consuming lamb multiple times a week. But certainly when it comes to sort of special occasions and things like that, it's pretty near the top of the list for them. So the domestic market's going to continue to be important for us going forward. But yeah, as Phil has explained, there's a whole host of other opportunities out there as well.
I think, Alistair, if I can, and I'm aware I'm stepping on your time frame, but I think we can take great comfort in the fact that it's an amazing product. The quality's there, the taste there, the story, the environment, the tradition, the family farms, the countryside, all those messages are there. Really strong reputation for UK lamb, both domestically and overseas. So that's really positive. We also have strong domestic demand and growing domestic demand from both our own Muslim population and the Muslim population in other parts of the world. So I think there's great future for UK lamb. Might not look like it looked 20 years ago, but I think we'll still continue to sell the product well, both home and abroad, as we seek further opportunities and shore up our domestic consumption.
Well, that's a very positive note on which to finish. I'd like to thank, on behalf of everybody watching and listening, Phil Hadley and David Swales, and we look forward to future NSA webinars, of which new subject matter has already been mentioned today. Thank you very much indeed.
Many thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye now.